Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists.
Okay, welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. As you can see, I'm somewhere interesting. I'm back in Guatemala City. I'm your host, Francisco Gonzalez. I want to thank you for joining us. We have an amazing guest here today, a guy who's been a friend of mine for a few years now, Julian Castillo. Julian, thank you and welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Thank you, Francisco, por invitarme. Thank you for inviting me.
De nada. Anyway, Julian, we're here in Guatemala City. He is Guatemalan, of course. He was born and raised here. But before we get to Julian's story, I have to remind people, especially if this is your first time listening or watching the Agents of Innovation podcast, we're on all the different platforms. So if you might be listening on Spotify, Apple, or some other listening platform. If you want to watch us and see the beautiful views here, this one's going to be a very interactive with the city here, with what we're talking about with Julian. Go over to the YouTube channel, type in Agents of Innovation podcast on your YouTube search bar, and you'll find us there. Also, many of the previous guests on the Agents of Innovation podcast are also now featured innovators in the Fearless Journeys community, and this is an opportunity for you to connect with them directly. So it's awesome to listen to people and watch them on a podcast, but be able to interact with them sometimes in person at our various meetups in different places. We've done like dinner meetups in Miami and Nashville and Denver and Atlanta and other places like that. But we also go out of the country, and we've done 4 group trips now to Guatemala, a few to Colombia, Argentina, Uruguay. We also went to Nashville. Coming up this year, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, in February, we will be doing a group trip to the Dominican Republic, and we also have some trips in the works to Norway, Morocco, and to the Patagonia country of Argentina. So you can find all this information at fearlessjourneys.org, and also on at least one of our Fearless Journeys group trips to Guatemala, we included Julian, and you got to meet him before he was even ever on the podcast. So Julian, thank you again for being here. So Julian is one of the founders of Ciudad. That's Ciudad with an S, not C, because if you know Spanish, Ciudad is spelled Ciudad, and that means city in Spanish. But he named his organization Ciudad with an S. Can you tell us why, Julian?
Ciudad is a positive mindset. So with the yes, iri, or the Ciudad, we want to create this positive mindset where we can change cities for the good. Like we can improve life in cities. And that's how it was born, the brand and the whole mindset we are trying to build.
That's awesome. So as you know, for most people know that the word sí in Espanol, S-I, means yes. So he took the yes and the city and put it together. So that's pretty creative. Speaking of the city, Julian, we're standing here in the middle of Zone 10 of Guatemala City. Can you maybe tell our viewers as they're listening in here, I know you're an architect and designer, and we're going to get to everything that Ciudad does and your path there. But the lighting is so beautiful right now, just a little bit before sunset. On this side of the city, we're in Zone 10 looking north. Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing here.
Yes, we're looking to the north right now, so we can also feel the wind, because usually Guatemala City has north wind, and that's the city center where we can find the origin of Guatemala City in this valley that is called Valle Las Vacas, or Valle de la Virgen is also called. And it was born in that area, but suddenly after 100 years we have seen like the city development coming to the south. So most of the city centers, the actual city centers, are now in these areas that are more in the southern part. And we can see also the ravines. 42% of Guatemala City is conformed by ravines. Right now we are in like Zona Viva, we call it, that is like the financial district, and we can find many businesses, banks, also living areas or residence spaces, and we can find like there's a lot of activity. People come here every day. Like 1.7 million people come every single day to Guatemala City to work. We have found that in the from the city center to the south, del Papa al Mapa, we say, from the Mapa en Relieve to the Pau Monument is 10 kilometers. And in that area, all these people coming from the outskirts of the city, from the suburbs, come here to work and to entertain themselves or to find services. So it's like really lively area of the city, and it's growing.
Yeah, so it's interesting because Guatemala City's the largest city in Central America. And for those who might think of what is Central America, well, we're not including Mexico. We're including everything from Guatemala, Honduras, down to Panama, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, all included in Central America. So we're in the largest city right now in Central America. And Julian, you mentioned 1.7 million come in from outside the city every day. How many live in the city, that live and work in the city every day?
Around 1.8 million people like really sleep in this area, because if we sum up both, it's like 3.5 million people living in the metropolitan area. As you said, is the biggest city in Central America.
And for those coming outside the city, what is their average commute time, each way?
It could be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and 4 hours. Like, depends a lot where you're coming from. But many people will tell you that the traffic is insane, and there's like a lot of accidents in the way. So it's not like a really pleasant way to come in. And this is being caused by many things. Like, first is regulations had to do a lot, because building in the city is much more expensive than building in the outskirts of the city. So people prefer to have like cheaper land in the outskirts than buying here. But at the same time, they are having more time of commute, or they have less sleep, or less time for them to exercise or study or whatever they want to do. So I think it's a strategy for the city to facilitate, to create incentives for people to build in the city centers or the areas where the work is, to really improve life conditions and reduce the time people are commuting every single day.
So you say it's more expensive. Is that because the property value is more expensive, or because the regulations make it more expensive to build?
Both, because cities, in terms of demand and supply, if in cities you have to increment the supply in order to reduce the costs. So here, usually cities attract people. Cities are proximity, are closeness. Edward Glaser called them like the lack of physical space, because people together create awesome things. So usually land is always more expensive in cities than in the outskirts, but regulations or these arbitrary norms usually make much more expensive than it should be. So we could have like a more affordable housing in the city centers, in the area where the work is, if the regulations were more like incentives instead of limiting. They should promote living in the city,
So Guatemala City, also just interesting dynamics. I've been coming here since 2019. I lived here for a year in 2021. I lived in Zone 10. I worked and taught at the Universidad Francisco Marroquin, where you also went to school and have now taught. And so that where I was all in Zone 10 in terms of where I lived, where I worked, and I watched several buildings, multiple buildings, condo buildings, apartment buildings, go up, and some of these are 10, 20, 25-story buildings. And so from my perspective, just kind of as an outsider who's been coming here, it just seems like even just in the last 6 years, there's been a lot of growth, a lot of new developments here. Actually, I was at the Oakland Mall today for the first time in over a year, and I saw that whole new wing they did, which really amazed me. And I was like, the malls here are pretty incredible, actually. It reminds me of the malls in the U.S. in like the 80s, but Amazon kind of destroyed that now. So I tell Guatemala, I don't know if you want Amazon, you might not have these nice malls anymore. But but it's really great. But some people might look at this, and I know you're an architect, a designer, now an urban planner, and say, don't you got enough people in the city? Why do you want to keep building in the city? And what would be the reasoning for building more in the city?
First is to augment the density, because sometimes we see, okay, there's a lot of people living here, there's a lot of construction, we still have to build a lot more. But if we compare the numbers to other cities, we still have a low density. Like you compare it, Manhattan has 27,000 people living per square kilometer. Or in Barcelona, you have 15,000 people living per square kilometer. Wow. But in Guatemala, you have certain areas in this corridor that I was telling you about, 3,000 people per square kilometer, 5,000 or 10,000 in the densest areas. So I think there's still a possibility or a chance to build more, and that's a good thing, because you are bringing people closer where they work. I also think it's important to decentralize, to make more urban poles around the country for people to find where they live, where they work, where they do their thing, whatever they choose to do, close by, because that's more efficient and it reduces costs. At the end, a city is successful if you have more benefits than costs, and I think reducing the costs will make people invest more in their whatever they want to invest in, or have more resources for them to have a proper house and not live in the outskirts that sometimes is like as I was saying, really tedious for them to move around.
Yeah, it's interesting because one thing I studied, and you probably know this a lot more than me, is when you have that density, that's, if you're already going to build power lines, you're already going to build cable or water utilities infrastructure, if you have, 10,000 people using something versus, 2,000 people, it makes the cost per person come down in terms of all the infrastructure, including roads and everything, right? Bike lanes, whatever it is.
Agglomeration economies.
What's that called?
Agglomeration economies. Like you have more people, you can have all the benefits, but the costs per person, per capita are less. So that's the benefits of cities, really.
So Julian, I want to just kind of, so we opened this up here, just racing right into this talk about Guatemala City. But I do want to also ask you a little bit more about your background. You are born and raised here in Guatemala. And I know, tell us a little bit about your time growing up here and your educational background and then how you got into the career that you're doing.
Totally. Since I was a child or a little boy, I really loved design, like challenging things, questioning myself, and I always loved to play outside. So I also come from an architect's background, like my grandfather was an architect, my great-grandfather was also an architect. So the design process or looking at the blueprints and the tables was quite normal for me. And then I choose to study architecture at UFM, and it's like a beautiful campus, as you know it. It's like a integration between buildings and nature, and I really love that. But when you go to Guatemala City, even though it's like really green, you cannot find parks as many as I would love to. I used to play on the streets, but now streets are full of cars, so playing on the street is not like a good option right now. It should be, but we should also have more parks, more urban areas, more sidewalks to walk by, or even mixed streets where you can bike, you can go with your any modes of transportation that doesn't rely on a motor. It should be easier, because Guatemala is a small city if you see it in area, but moving around is like quite complex sometimes. Even in the morning or in the afternoon, where it's the peak hours, is really complex to move. So I saw these challenges as an opportunities, because we are, as I was saying, a small city compared to the big cities in the world. So there's a lot to do here, but we need to change the vision. Like right now is like how we can have more parking spaces, more cars, because as you were saying, there's a lot of new residential buildings, but as you go up, there's also going down. Like you have 7, 8, 9 stories of underground parking, and every single trip is being made by car by all these people living here. You can listen now to all the honks from the buses and the cars, because it's like the peak hour, and there's no road capacity that can stand this amount of cars at this time of the day, where all people are trying to get out of the city. So I think we have to improve urban qualities and also integrate our biggest assets that are like nature, ravines. The climate is perfect almost all of the year, even though it's like have a rainy season. It's also quite nice in terms of temperature, and we can also design for sidewalks to be covered. Like in Zone 1, you can find many streets that they were covered with infrastructure of the buildings, and you can walk around tranquil. Like you can be peacefully walking on streets without getting wet. So we can design for that. You can see cities like Singapore that also are integrating nature with the city. There's a lot of technologies and alternatives. We just have to focus our resources on that. And I think right now there's a little bit confusion in terms of what are you really paying for, because there's a lot of normatives and regulations that really mess up a little bit of things. So you don't know how much are you really paying for your services. And most of people that live in the city pay for the infrastructure that are being used by the people that don't pay these services. So I think we have to be more market-driven strategies where you can really pay for what you want. And also, if you want to live in the outskirts, it's fine, but you have to pay your way in, because you are in the other way. You are subsidizing this infrastructure.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there that you talked about. And first of all, when you talked about resources, Guatemala, for a lot of people outside of Guatemala, first of all, I think there's like a few perspectives when I bring up Guatemala to people in the U.S. If people have been following me for the last few years, they know Guatemala. I talk about it all the time. But for the most part, I think there's a few perspectives from outside Guatemala. One is, what is Guatemala? Where is it, right? People know where Mexico is. They kind of know where Central America is, but they don't really know where to place Guatemala. Other people who might think of Guatemala, they see people leaving Guatemala. They see the migrants coming to the U.S. They see a lot of poor people leaving. Then people just generally think it's dangerous here. And there have been times in Guatemala's somewhat recent history where maybe it was a little more dangerous. But with that being said, correct me if I say anything wrong here, but I think probably about half of the people in this country live in poverty. Is that about right?
Yeah, it depends on how you measure poverty, but we have a lot of people living in the rural areas that they don't have access to the services they need to have a better life. But yeah, like I'm also working on a project that related to poverty and prosperity, and we have been implementing the poverty stoplight. I don't know, have you heard of it?
Yeah.
But it's amazing how they we can use like 50 indicators to measure poverty, because even being stuck in traffic is a sign of poverty, or don't having time for sleep, that's also kind of poverty, or don't have time for exercise. So there's a lot of things we can measure, but we can say that almost half of population in Guatemala lack at least something they need to be the best version in a way.
Yeah, I mean, look, I tell people now the other half of Guatemala is living middle class and maybe upper class lifestyle, and if you come to places like in Zone 10, I mean, you have very modern apartment buildings, condo buildings. Like I said, the beautiful malls. So there's universities here, including the one that we like, Universidad Francisco Marroquin. Which, by the way, speaking of which, you mentioned your grandfather. Your grandfather, by the way, UFM. For those who have never been, it's a really beautiful campus. The university was founded in 1971. But the current campus was built in the 1980s, I believe.
1984.
Yeah, and your grandfather was one of the designers. Can you tell us a little bit about his story?
Yeah, he was more in charge of the construction of the city of the. It's almost city, so I just got confused. But of the university campus, and at the time it was the architect Lau, who was the architect who really designed the master plan, but also lots of Muso's friends were involved with
Muso being the founder of UFM.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
were involved with the process. So I think it was challenging at the time, because the site is not so easy, because you have some like downhills, and you could they really design a way to integrate the landscape with the buildings. Nowadays it's almost in the middle of the city, because Zone 10 has become like a really attractive area to live, to work, and to do lots of things, and also to study. So I think.
So when UFM was built here in Zone 10, it wasn't as active.
Yeah, it was more like a residential area.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's a really beautiful part. And like anyway, like you said, with the resources, it just seems like generally people do move to cities. Cities are attractive because they have a lot of resources, and a lot of what maybe if people do think of. Those folks here who live in poverty, especially a lot of the people in the rural, more indigenous population, that is more what we just said. More in the rural areas. Guatemala is also, like you said, it's not a large country geographically. It's not a large city geographically, like in terms of the number of kilometers each way. But boy, it takes a long time to get around. And people look at the map, and a lot of people fly into Guatemala City Airport. And they head to Antigua. That's one of the I think it's the number one tourist hotspot maybe in Latin America now. And it could take you, with no traffic, 45 minutes. I've done it.
Yeah.
But it could take you, I was a month ago in 3 hours of traffic between the airport and Antigua.
Yeah.
And so it's not, what is it, like 30 kilometers. I don't know. It's not that far.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. So it's and then when you look, I mean, I just went to Samuk Champay for my first time, 6-7 hour drive each way, and actually we didn't even sit in much traffic, just a lot of windy, mountain roads and things like that. So that's another factor. We do have mountains here as well. Yeah. So Julian, you studied design and architecture. Other than getting involved in now this new organization you started, tell me some of the things you've designed.
Well, I've designed houses, residential buildings, also parks and modular structures for schools, for hospitals, odontological centers. So a lot of things that really, like every single project is so unique, but the process is the one that is kind of the same. Like it starts with empathy, just as the design thinking process. Understand the client, understand the needs, and then start to ideate and create some prototypes that are like these models, these blueprints, and then put it into physical space. But the urban projects usually take more time. But we, with certain friends and architects, also started this movement to create more parks in the city, and we developed at the time Jungla Urbana, the concept, and also involved a lot of the community members. And just like 2 years ago, we finished another park in Zone 7 in an area where there was a trash dump, and we transformed it into a park. And now children and the people from the community have a space to gather, to make activities, to learn, to chill. So I think there's a lot to do, and in my perspective, there's a lot to do in Guatemala City, and especially in the urban areas. And during the pandemic, I went to live in the house that I designed in Lake Atitlan, and I think that
I've been there. Yes, thanks for putting me up there before.
It's beautiful house. But
I didn't want to leave. I said, can I buy this house?
And during the pandemic, make a lot of sense. Like everything was online, but then I kind of get bored. Like I love being in contact with other people and having more density. And that's when I took the course of Cities X from Edward Glaser, and also read lots of books from like Green Metropolis from David Owen or Jane Jacobs, or there's a lot of bibliography that I can share with you. But those themes really make me really curious about how economics, design, social interaction, social behavior, psychology, anthropology, and so many other sciences get together to understand cities. And at the end, cities are the association of free people. Like if there's no freedom, there's no cities. Cities are freedom in a way. So I love that, because there's no like a recipe for cities to be. We just have to get together with the people we are living with and design the cities that we like. Like as I was telling in the design thinking process, like having empathy with who are really living here and the future citizens from these areas, and design like with a more like a interactive approach the infrastructure we need. Like if we need sewages, we need water infrastructure, we need roads, streets, whatever, we have to do it with the people. And having the process, a more participatory process, we can achieve much more.
So speaking of cities and cool designs and nice buildings, we're actually in the Avia building here in Zone 10. It's a beautiful complex. Tell me a little bit, can you explain this building for somebody maybe that hasn't seen it? It's not just one building, but it's just a huge structure.
Yeah, it has hotels, restaurants, commercial areas, and the last phase was this residential building. So it's really nice, because when I was in Lake Atitlan, I decided to come to the city, and I wanted to have a small space where I can have everything close to me, like university where I teach. I have this area that is a common space for us to gather and work with my team, and also have the banks. Whatever I need is close to me. So I wanted to like live the values that I preach, that is proximity, being close to all your needs, and also having a smaller space, but having more shared areas, and also a community. I love my neighbors. They are really interesting. I've learned so much from them, and we have also built projects together. So this area I think is an example of what the city could be. People interacting in the plazas, with the trees, having an exchange of ideas, of projects. You can meet your future partner in a restaurant or in the cafe. So that's the cool thing about
You've got a
cities and about
CrossFit
Avia.
and a yoga and all this stuff kind of going on in the same huge plaza. Well, speaking of the Avia building, we're going to actually pause this part of the interview and move to the other side because I'm seeing the sun setting with the volcanoes, and this is a more beautiful urban area here. Cayala is back there, and that's kind of I don't know, what would you describe Cayala as?
Cayala is a private development that tried to do everything that I was telling you about, having proximity between residential areas, commercial spaces, walkable streets. The project itself has really good values and foundations in terms of what they bring to the table in Guatemala City, where everything is sprawled out. It's an experiment, but I think it's a good experiment. Most people like it, and I think for the future, I feel like we have to invest in our districts, in our neighborhoods, and create the idea of Cayala, of having these mixed-use developments in other parts of the city, and try to rely less on the car. I think the car is a great tool to mobilize yourself, but it hasn't, you shouldn't rely on it in every single day to your activities. So I think, and it doesn't have to be a necessity, like in the city, to own a car, because owning a car is also expensive in a way. So you want in cities to have lower costs. So making people to walk or everything more close around can be beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in a little bit because it's rush hour here, and these cars don't look like they're moving anybody around.
No.
So, all right, we'll take a pause and we'll go to the other side of the building.
Super.
Okay, so we're back here at the Agents of Innovation podcast. We've switched scenes on you. We're on the other side of Avia. And Avia. And
Avia.
Julian, before we continue the interview, can you tell us about this amazing skyline behind us that we're seeing now?
Totally. This is my favorite time of the day, where you can see all the colors and the transitions from daylight to nighttime. And we have Volcán de Pacaya. This is an active volcano. Also, we have Volcán de Agua, Volcán de Fuego, and Volcán Acatenango. So I think it's one of, I don't know any other city, maybe one in Peru, that has 4 volcanoes and 2 of them being active in the skyline. So I think it's a pretty impressive thing about Guatemala City, and something we could be taking more into advantage in terms of terraces and spaces to be outside or to appreciate these beautiful sunsets.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that have never been to Guatemala don't understand it. But first of all, this part of Guatemala, between Guatemala City, Antigua, and Lake Atitlán, is often called the eternal spring because the temperatures are pretty temperate year-round. I mean, for those in Fahrenheit, they're typically in the 60s and 70s. We're sitting out here in January, and it's probably 68, 70 degrees here just before sunset. It'll probably drop to the upper 50s tonight, get to the mid to upper 70s maybe tomorrow. And this is maybe it fluctuates a little bit, a very tiny bit during parts of the year. And then you have about half the year between about May and October. That's the rainy season. But boy, between November and April, it's just perfect here all the time. I see. And then on top of that, Guatemala City's in basically a valley, right? You have mountains all around. When you fly into Guatemala City, it's absolutely beautiful coming as you're descending from the north, coming into Guatemala. And then you've got these amazing volcanoes, which, again, for people who are not used to volcanoes seem to trigger people and get them a little scared when they're not so certain about them. And certainly there's been some eruptions at different times. But, I've seen Pacaya erupt, the one behind us here, in 2021. It was super active for about a month or two. And it even had lava flows and everything. But, it's good enough distance from Guatemala City. I think there was 1 or 2 days there was some ash here, and I remember sitting outside, and I probably shouldn't have been because all of a sudden I saw some film on my laptop and them cleaning the streets because it's just very, you don't even almost notice it falling, but it's just over time it builds up. Fuego is way too far, I think, to do any damage to Guatemala City, except to maybe close the airport from time to time if there's an eruption. But Fuego, we may see it here in camera. Usually about every 15, 20 minutes we get a plume of smoke, so we'll see if we see that here. But beautiful terrain, and I've hiked 3 and I see Fuego just on cue. Fuego, I don't know if we got that in the camera angle, but Fuego is pluming right now, just on cue. See, it heard me, And it's by the way, I've been on Fuego, I've been on Acatenango, and I've been on Pacaya. I guess I don't know if I should. People tell me to stay away from Agua, but I think it's just kind of dangerous terrain or something. But anyway, yeah, beautiful. I mean, I think when you incorporate the nature and the city, that's really where you get a gem of a city. And I really love Guatemala City. But speaking of there's a lot of challenges, right? I mean, even though we just talked about all the nice things, we talked about traffic, and a lot of other challenges, but let's get back to what you started, Ciudad with an S, and tell us a little bit about Ciudad and the kind of team that's involved and the different areas that you guys are working on.
Yeah, it was a really spontaneous process because when I was focused on architecture and I saw the opportunity in urban realm, I started to focus a lot of that, and I started a course at UFM that is called Ciudad because I wanted to bring that positive mindset, because when you ask younger generations about the city, they say, no, I don't like it, it's too dangerous, or too much traffic, or there's nothing to do, or there's not enough parks. But what if we could transform this lack or this absence into something that we could really have and have an asset on the city, right? So we started with this course, and there were like 20 students at the beginning, and then we started to add up, and now we have more than 250 students. And one of those students told me, I want to join this venture. I really love your ideas and I would love to do something together. And we started a company last year, Ciudad. Now we are 4 members in the company, in the team, but we usually bring students to the projects as well, because we love to have different backgrounds, and we usually teach to medicine students, ontology, engineers, economics, and so many other architects as well, because we think that cities are not just for the urbanists or for the architects, it's for everyone. Everyone enjoys or does not enjoy the good things and the bad things of the city, so we have to be get involved to change it and make it ours. So we have 3 main services in the company. The first one is the data collection and analysis. We also have the urban strategy and design consultancy services, and we also have the workshops and learning experiences. So with these services, we want to attract the real estate developers or municipality members or citizens or any entrepreneur or businessman that wants to invest in the city to have the tools and the design mechanisms to make it more effective in terms of incomes and economic productivity, but also to increase the safety and the beauty of our public and urban infrastructure. Because at the end, even though you are designing a building, the way you design it to interact with the streets, to make lighting effective, to choose the materials wisely, to integrate the trees or the nature, really makes a difference into how we are developing the city. And as you were saying also with Oakland Mall, like I really love the mall itself, but I usually visualize these malls or these commercial areas as potential mixed-use developments where they could have been also with residential spaces at the top. Imagine living in a place where you can just go downstairs and go to the cinema or enjoy your favorite restaurant. Like, that's the cool thing about cities, and we should embrace it more mixed. So I think with the mix of uses, the parks and the infrastructures and the investments, it's going to be a really successful city. But nowadays we are like kind of stuck in this like a negative mentality. So with Ciudad, we want to transform that. And I think we are doing it right. We have been collaborating with people from outside the city and also from the city, developing the plots of land, because there's a lot of farms in Guatemala, like coffee farms or other big plots of lands that could be potential cities. But we have to visualize them as neighborhoods or districts instead of just focusing on developing 500 houses, because that's kind of the problem we are creating, right? We are creating a lot of focalized residences, but where these people are going to buy their food, where are they going to work, where they're going to school, or acquire their medical services. We need to have a more holistic mindset, and that's why we are really focused on the data collection, because when we understand the market and the needs, we can provide the design services needed to make the project the most successful one.
So when you talked before about you guys had courses, those were at UFM?
Yes, mostly at UFM, but also we have online courses.
Oh, interesting. Where can people find it? The online?
In Ciudad, but we usually do it in Zoom, like really personalized people that want to teach. But we are right now working on the content to bring it to the website, to ciudad.org, and where we want to build up a lot of our courses and content so people can just download it. But we have been working together with Strong Towns. I don't know if you know this initiative. They're also around the world trying to give, or not trying, they are giving the tools to many communities that are being organized to improve the urban conditions. So I think there's like a global movement to improve cities, because we have seen that there's an attraction of talent and people coming into cities. Like right now we are in the era of cities or urban development. There's more people living in cities than in rural areas, the first time in history, and the tendency is going up, like more people are going to live here. But we want to create places to be healthy, to be happy, to be fulfilled. There's a really good book about happy cities from Matt Montgomery, and he talks about not just measuring the amount of infrastructure, but also measuring how people are feeling fulfilled or happy or connected with their communities. And I think that's key in order to make successful cities.
Ciudad, is it a for-profit company, a non-profit? What is it?
It's a for-profit company. I think the incentives are right for both sides. Like the companies or the developers want to make money, and that's good, but also they want to give a good heritage to the city, or they want to add value. So we want to do the same. Like as a team, we want to help this businessman or the developers to gain money, but also give something back to the city. And I think it's a win-win. As we know, market-driven initiatives are the most effective ones, and we are working to gain more clients, to gain more followers in terms of understanding what the city needs. Because sometimes I feel like we live in the past in terms of just copying the mistakes of many other cities instead of just learning from them and leapfrogging to the solutions we need for the future. A lot of cities, they lack water. Here in Guatemala, you just have a swell, or you just pump out water from the underground layers. But that's not a thing in many other cities in the world, where you have to import water from other water resources. So I think we have here a lot of resources, but they're not for granted. You have to take care of them. You have to replenish your aquifers. You have to invest in this infrastructure. You have to separate the solid waste with the liquid waste. You have to treat them. So you have to invest on that kind of infrastructure. You have to buy land for parks. They're not just coming out of anything, so out of nothing. So you have to invest. And that's the thing that I want to acknowledge more about the cities, is that cities are people, and we have to organize ourselves in order to invest in these infrastructures.
Yeah, Guatemala it really is abundant with natural resource. It's amazing. And as I said that, by the way, Fuego just plumed again, less than 10 minutes. So it's just really loving us. It's giving us some love tonight. But well, going back, so you have one area where you actually teach. I'm assuming it's mostly the next generation or the rising generation about all these design and urban planning concepts. But then, like the company Ciudad, it studies, it does a lot of research, and then it employs that in actual design ideas, and then that's what you're working with developers and I don't know. Are you working with private developers? Plus, are you also working with like public officials or any kind of public anything to do with any government entities?
Yeah, all of them. They are all of our potential clients. We work with the private or public sector. At the end, we want to improve life in city. That's our mission, our mantra. The thing we work every single day is to improve life in cities. And the means can vary. Like we can work with individual citizens, organizations of neighbors, or students, or universities, academia, whoever wants to build better cities. That's our our purpose. And right now we are also looking a really potential area that is neighbor from UFM that is called Ciudad Vieja. Originally the city was in the north, and there was like a little another town called Ciudad Vieja that started when people came from Antigua Guatemala to Guatemala, this area, to this valley. They started to create much more of the food, the Ciudad Vieja. So now it's in the middle of Zone 10, and it's a beautiful neighborhood that has a church, has this plaza and a park. It could be felt like Antigua, but you try to walk there and sidewalks are in bad state. Much of streets are for parking. There's just like small houses, but you see a lot of the development of buildings being there. But how are they building? They are building just lots of levels with car-oriented strategies. We should like change the mindset and try to make it more like a cohesive environment or cohesive district where you can have every mixed-use offerings, and you have also the famous street that is called Calle Hospitales, like the hospital street where you can find many of the medical services, and it's really close or next to this Ciudad Vieja. So we envision with the students to have a more mixed-use development where we can provide services such as the water treatment and also the sewage treatment, and also create beautiful streets, beautiful parks, and organization of community members that can improve the condition of that district. And that district can be, like the strategy to create this district can be replicated in other parts of the city. And I feel like as the body has cells and organs, we should have the same approach with cities, having various cells working independently but also connected between each other, so you can travel from one cell to another freely, but you don't depend to do it daily. And that's the thing that is going to be a game changer in our city, because right now people live in one place but they work here, so that's a really inefficient way of moving around. So we need to create this mixed-use developments, cells, neighborhood districts along the city that can be replicated. And replicated by whom? By the people. The free people that are choosing what's better for them in a time that is better for them, and not a centralized government that is deciding for them, because at the end these cookie cutter solutions are not working. You need to have tailored solutions, more people-oriented solutions.
So speaking of that, we talked about before how this city geographically is not super large, but it's really hard to get around, mostly because to go from one part of a city to the other, you pretty much need a car or motorcycle. There is public transportation in terms of buses. It's I try once in a while around, but especially around rush hour, if I'm trying to get from, say, Zone 10 to Zone 4, I don't want to sit even in an Uber to move. You don't even move. But if you walked, it would be like 40 minutes. But it's just not that far. So you have these the scooters that you can rent, but then you get on the scooters and like half the sidewalks are like bump. You can't even could almost kill yourself because there's so many, not just cracks. I mean, it's like totally different levels on the sidewalks. But once you kind of get to the Reforma here, and you go, I mean, they have dedicated bike lanes, and scooters can go in there as well. Walkers. That can be active. I know maybe not so much at night, maybe because it's kind of dark, but during the day or early evening, people can go that way. And so if I can make my way over there, I can go up to Zone 4 and be there in no time. And I zoom on that little scooter, or even if you had a bicycle, all the way past all this traffic. And I imagine that would be very easy. And then, like you said, you could continue up actually to Zone 1 or Zone 2. And if you wanted to go to the other way to 13 or 14, very easy on that area. But it's kind of the horizontal areas to get there is very difficult. So bike lanes, scooters, sidewalks, public transportation, buses. I'm just throwing all this out there, Julian. Some cities have subways or other kind of metros. Some cities have. I was in Medellin, Colombia, and they've got the metro cables. I've seen some ideas for that here. What's in the works for Guatemala City? What do you think can work, and what do you think is possible?
I think the most efficient and cost efficient as well solutions for Guatemala City is to get things closer, like in terms of facilitating this accessible infrastructure to walk. That is the most cost effective way of moving around. And buses can be also really effective, scooters as well. I think the metro, another kind of like big infrastructure that is being talked about, I think is not the priority right now. Is the most expensive solution to a problem that is not being understood. Because if we understood the problem, we could solve it with a more creative approach. I think it's a matter of how you are responsible with the citizens' money and invested in these like small but really accurate solutions along the city. As you were saying, you can cross Reforma Americas, but you are in the middle. You don't have connection to the commercial areas. A good example is like in on Sundays when you have Pasos y Pedales, where old Americas and Reforma is being pedestrianized, and it feels a completely different city. People, most of commercial areas around this time, that is like from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., they have told me that they sell much more because people are more connected with the commercial areas and they can just buy whatever they need. But when like in normal hours they have to park, there's not enough parking, there's traffic and so on, so many other things. So having pedestrianized areas is also good for economy, good for commercial areas. Creating beautiful areas is also attractive. Like I was reading, I just came from Miami Beach, and Miami as a city has 50 million people coming every single year as visitors. Like 36 million people stay in Miami City. In Guatemala, we have 3 million people coming like in the year to all the country. So I think it's like a really small number compared to the potential, but I think it's also a matter of infrastructure. We need a new airport. I think this airport, oh, that's beautiful. I think the airport could be changed to another location, and we could create this area a huge park and create more real estate developments around it. And with all these new square meters that can be built, because you don't have now the limitations of the planes, you could invest that money into creating a line that connects the city with the airport and make a proper airport where you can have international flights all along the world, because this lane has a little bit short compared to other lanes in the world. So I think there's a huge potential into creating these parks of these areas and connecting the city, as I was saying, into districts that are interconnected, like the super blocks of Barcelona. That strategy, I think, is really accurate for Guatemala, incentivizing more living areas where the work is, and making more accessible for people to walk, bike, use the public transportation, the buses, or even the Ubers or the shared means of transportation, and to have more efficient use of resources.
So there's a lot I want to ask you, because all this stuff really interests me. So you mentioned the airport. I think potentially in the video here, people might have seen a few planes taken off, because it's literally like right there. And when I was, most of the time I land from the south. It kind of circles around. But the other day I actually landed from the north, and man, when you land, you feel like you're just dodging buildings here, right? I mean, it just feels like. I mean, I know it's much higher, but like you said, it does that lane for the planes. And the airport is very small. The runway is very small. I know they're redoing some parts of the runway, so I mean, it's like they have to have a big space between when the flights actually can take off and land for some of those reasons. I thought about that before too, because I thought, well, it's kind of one great thing about the airport. It's right in the city, so you get off. I mean, you don't have to go very far if you're here in Guatemala City, but it's also very limited. And boy, there's a lot of traffic between here and Antigua. Where would a new airport be, and what would it look like?
That's a good question. Like, there's a lot of projects related into making Escuintla, like the southern part of the country, to make the airport there. Or could be in Zone 18, that there's like a lot of farms there that could be developed into the airport. like there's a lot of options. I don't know. I don't want to tell you a specific
Yeah.
location because there's also people working on those possibilities. But I think also in Reu, in Retaluleu, they're trying to build a new airport, and there's a lot of. But then they also have another one where we could find a location that is close enough to the city where we can invest a train or a straight connection that can optimize the time. But I think the benefits we are going to acquire are much bigger than the costs of having the airport in the middle of the city nowadays. Because it's not only the things you just mentioned, but also the noise. It's like most people that live and work in these areas have to listen to every single time the motors. We also are limited in terms of the air traveling from the agencies and so many other things. And also we lack a big park. We don't have a big park in the city. And you go to the original plans in the 1800s, in the late 1800s, you can find that Aurora farm or Aurora land was originally designed as a park, and it's beautiful because
And that's the airport, La Aurora.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the plan was at the time, but then it came the First World War, and a lot of initiatives from the United States, and they helped build this airport and so many other things. But cities change, like I've been to Berlin or in Austin where they transformed their former airports into parks, and now they're one of the most livable areas in the city, and it attracts people. So I think you can see like the transformation of many cities, like even most of the industrial cities of the time that were really polluted. I just visited Copenhagen as well, and they have like this really polluted canal, and now it's one of the most attractive areas in the city. So I think you have to see infrastructure or the physical space as something that can be transformed. Like
Yeah.
here, 10 years ago, it was a house, and now you have many hotels, restaurants, and so many other things because we transform the land. And that's why I mentioned that cities are not the physical environment. Cities are the people, but the urban space, the urban environment is the one that we build. And we build according to what? To our values, to our vision, to our desires, to our dreams.
Yeah, and I can imagine, well, first of all, let me say on the airport, wherever they build a new airport, if they ever do, and like you said, maybe there's a train or something, but man, they need to get like people to Antigua faster because I feel like so many people they come here and they go right to Antigua. Not to mention so many people in the city like to go to Antigua on the weekends or something, and it's beautiful, and it's not that far. I mean, it's closer than those volcanoes that I'm looking at, so it's physically not that far. But and it's such a gem. Again, you got to almost ask yourself how many people you want to come to Antigua every week or something, right? But Miami's doing it with 50 million people a year, and that's really Miami and Florida in general, where I live, is a real outlier. I mean, I don't even know how I think it was 140 million people last year came to Florida alone. 140 million plus the 27 million or whatever that lived there, wherever we're at. We're in 20-something million. But anyway, but also if you had a better airport where you could have more air traffic, you could have a lot more connecting flights. Panama has a ton of flights, right? El Salvador even has a number of flights where people are connecting to go to other places, South America, and also, the other way, the U.S., Europe.
Or Panama too.
Yeah, so I think Guatemala on the map has really got a nice location, and as much as the country continues to improve, I think you could actually, the redesign of that city. And I really do like the way you explain how cities evolve. They're not static. They change, and we see that. I mean, I see that in Florida. I mean, if you look at pictures from Florida 50, 60 years ago, and you see it now, and even just 20, 30 years ago, I mean, just so much changes happening so quickly. So you can do it. But yeah, and do you, are there, I mean, so you're focused on Guatemala, obviously there's enough challenges here, but are you in conversation with people in other cities about what has worked there that you might try, or what you're doing here that they're thinking about? I don't know if there's any other places that you may be connecting with people at.
Yeah, I love traveling, and I was also part of a global network of innovators, and we usually discussed about the good things and good practices of cities. And I've been looking for things in common that usually when you are adapted to a certain lifestyle, changing can be difficult. But once you change for good, you won't even remember how things were. Like I think, as I was telling you, like I just went to Miami Beach, and it's incredible that you can just bike 15 kilometers in a matter of 1 hour, like biking relaxed. Here, from the Pope to the map, you have literally 10 kilometers, so it's even less. So you could be like literally going around the whole city in an hour and a half. That's one of the planes that is like landing right now or taking off. And also European cities, I love Amsterdam, and usually European cities that were built when most people walked are the ones that are more attractive for people to travel in. And most of the cities that are kind of new, they were designed for the car because that was the innovation of the time. And as I was saying, it's a tool, but that tool really, and also the irresponsible public investment, because in the United States much of the highways were subsidized by the government because it was like a security issue. So you see a lot of intromission from the state in creating this huge infrastructure, destroying many old cities and old towns to create these networks that, even though they have a lot of benefits, they also destroy a lot of things that could be beneficial today. So I think we have to learn from that. And Guatemala City and all the like cities in Guatemala have been influenced a lot from the Industrial Revolution and all the car industry. That it's good in terms of technology, but we have to know how to use it well in order to favor health and happiness. Because at the end, what's the goal of life? Is to have more or to live better. And I think we can have both. We can have like a proximity, we can have parks, we can have accessible residential spaces, we can have communities, but we have to design for that. It's not going to come from nowhere. We have to plan, we have to design, but plan enough to make spontaneous order take in. Like it's a balance, like planning enough for people to take decisions, not planning for them, because that's when the big governments and all these initiatives go down, I think, because they don't understand the real needs of people.
Yeah, this is great. No, I agree with you, though. I think the cities I like the most are the ones I can walk around, especially the ones I can feel safe in, but it's just pleasant to walk, pleasant to bike. You don't, there's sidewalks, there's people, there's things to do. Buenos Aires comes to mind.
Rio de Janeiro, too.
A lot of parks there, a lot of, Rio de Janeiro? I haven't
Medellin,
been there.
too.
Yeah, Medellin, yeah, for sure. Even to some extent, Bogota. Bogota also has a ton of traffic, but for the size of its city, I mean, there are parts of Bogota you can walk for a couple miles and feel just neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood. New York City too. I mean, for that matter, right? So I think, yeah. I mean, I like that the ability to be able to walk around, especially when you've got the density, and also to feel safe. I feel like, especially when I first started coming to Guatemala City. People told me not to walk outside by myself, especially at night. And, I understand at night. And there's not a lot of, I mean, unless you're in a certain couple of blocks, there's not a lot of lights. And I mostly I feel less safe at night here, mostly because there's nobody else out. Like if there were people out, I went to Medellin for the first time 2 years ago. And I was like, I wonder if it'll be okay to walk by myself at night at like 7, 8 o'clock when it's getting dark. Medellin was like the opposite. Like everybody comes out at night, it's crazy. And I was like, I feel perfectly safe here. And so anyway, it was it's really interesting. But I think Julian, what you're doing and the mindset you have that you're bringing, and I think the positive vibes and the Ciudad, like it's almost like a yes we can, right? Like yes to the city. And I think I think you have the ideas and the plans and the people. You're doing the courses, you're doing the research, you're working with the developers, you're working with the government. You're working like every angle. Like I feel like you've thought of every angle, and you've got a good team in place. I know, but also I think more than anything, like people have to believe in it, and that's what I love about your company's name and everything about it. Ciudad, like you're basically telling, because I know you like. maybe I could ask you another question, but there's got to be some serious obstacles to this, and I feel like one of those obstacles is probably the mindset of people just don't think things can change. Like, oh, things have been this way for so long, and the traffic's been getting worse, and just things aren't going to change. And but you kind of bring that mindset of I believe it can. So, but let me ask you one of the last questions here on what have been your major obstacles in trying to be part of this vision?
The mindset. That's why we changed the name, because from Ciudad to Ciudad, because most of the limits are here. No, that doesn't work in Guatemala, that the culture is different. No, we're not ready for that. I listen to this mental limitations that literally limit us in terms of the way we could be living. Like, we could be living in the dream, in heaven, in a way. I don't know how to explain it, but here is like a paradise. Like, we live in a beautiful area with beautiful people, and somehow people are like shouting to each other in traffic or having a bad vibe when we could be having the opposite. And then I travel and have this really positive feeling that things can work in other. Obviously there's challenges, and no city is perfect, but I come here and suddenly I feel like I'm kind of imprisoned. The infrastructure or the physical space is not providing me and other citizens the tools or the infrastructures we need to really develop and be our best selves. So those challenges, I think, rely on the mind. People think it's money. I think it's not money. It's creativity. You can do a lot with less. I love that mantra, or this idea to do the most with the least. That's an entrepreneurial mindset, right? You don't have a lot of money when you are starting a business. You need to be really creative in how to use the little resources you have and do the most out of them. But somehow when you have a lot of money in the governments and they think that you need the big projects and the big metro and have this amazing debt, I think it's really irresponsible. I think we need to go back to basics, go to the small scale, solve the little lights. I think the city infrastructure is the Christmas tree lights, where if there's one light that is not working, the whole line is broken. You need to work the little lights in order to the system
to just
work.
fix one little light at a time.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Like acupuncture, going neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street, understanding the dynamics, involving people, being people more participatory of how their resources are being invested, because the resources go to a common ground.
That sounds like trouble,
Why?
Getting more people to participate in how their resources are invested. I think some of the powers that be may be a little worried about that.
That's how the market works.
Yeah.
That's why the market is much more efficient than centralized government, because there's thousands and millions of micro decisions being made with the invisible hand and so many other things. And the same happens in cities. Sometimes you want to improve the conditions of your sidewalk, but then you have to have certain permits and certain things, and so you don't do it. But what about instead of paying my taxes into this big common pot, I just want to invest it in the improvement of my sidewalk that is in front of my house, and maybe other neighbors want that too. So we can have in real time the decisions and the aspirations of people. 50% of people want to improve the sidewalks, or other 50% want to improve the sewages. Okay, let's invest on that instead of just randomly investing the money in other parts of the city that they don't voted for that. So I think it's a participatory way of investing the resources. I know that is complex, but I think can be also really effective in terms of how decisions are being made in the city. And it goes to the essence of the city there. It's free people working together in a proximate distance and collaborating to make a better place to live.
On this question, I just want to ask you, so some might say maybe maybe a place like Guatemala might need some outside investment. Maybe it's from the U.S. or China or other places. Maybe that's from our governments. Maybe that's from private sector businesses. But also, like, so what potential investments do you think could be needed, or do you think Guatemalans can solve it themselves? They don't necessarily need the outside investment.
Everything is welcome, but I think we don't truly need it. It's not like an excuse. Okay, we don't have investment from other countries, so we are not going to develop our infrastructure. No, we can do it ourselves. It's just how we're managing the resources. I think we have to be really creative and more strategic on how we use the resources. Even could be monetary, could be like human capital, or anything we invest in the city should be aligned with our vision. It's like if I want to be a healthy person, I will use my budget into buying food that is good for my body, to investing in the time that I go to the gym, or whatever. But if I say I want to be healthy, but I just spend all my money in things that don't go align with that vision, I'm just wasting my time. And I think the same happens in Guatemala City and other cities. They have this beautiful slogan that they want to create this green city, sustainable city, whatever, but they're investing the money in underpasses for cars that we know that they don't work, or we are having all this money into salaries. Like most of the municipal budget is going into salaries, it's not going to investment. And the real investment is going from private developers, but it's like from if you do a nice development, you have to pay 1 million, 2 million, 5 million of quetzales in an infrastructure that does not reply to the real market. It's just like something that the government asked for. So I think we have to facilitate, we have to focus our energy in our objectives, and let people be more enthusiastic about participating on these goals. I think that's create a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and that's needed to create more cohesive environments, more safe environments, and better communities.
Well, Julian, this has been fantastic. You definitely have an amazing entrepreneurial mindset and just the mindset of an innovator. And so you are an agent of innovation, and that's why I wanted you on this podcast. And what you're doing with Ciudad, that's really great. So it's ciudad.org. Is that where people can find it? And we'll put that in the show notes here as well, so people can find it. And Julian, I know, I'm thinking about your history too. You came through UFM. You taught. I know that they really embed in people a real idea for an entrepreneur mindset. When you were talking before about asking, kind of asking the questions, I know they oftentimes push people to ask why not, or what else can be, not just live in kind of some box. I also know a couple years ago, you and I were talking about you were really reading some of the same books I was, like the Daily Stoic, and so really kind of I can kind of see that kind of coming out of you a little bit here as well too. So I know you've mentioned so many books that you've read, even on city planning. So I always tell people, like, if you really want to become an entrepreneur or build that entrepreneur mindset, you've got to be a lifelong learner like you are. You didn't just get an education in your primary school years and higher education, but you're now, you're constantly reading, you're constantly talking, also traveling. I think that's a big part. You're going and you're seeing other perspectives, you're bringing them back to Guatemala. So I think there's a lot we can all learn from you and what you've done. And also, I remember when I came here in 2021 and you were out at the lake most of the time. Actually, I met you out there, and you were kind of, just retreating from the city a little bit because, there was a lot of things closed and things like that. But you were using your time to study. But like you said earlier in this podcast, it's nice to be out in the retreat. I love being in the mountains or being out by the lake. But, people, you want to live with people. And that's why you came back to the energy of the city. And now you want to say, hey, how can we make this city better? And I want to be part of it. So we're here in 2025. It's a new year. We may revisit your story in 5, 10, 30, 40 years from now, and maybe there'll be a different, or not a different, but Guatemala City will have evolved into a different way, and maybe it'll be because of the innovations that Julian and his team at Ciudad have helped with. So, Julian, I just want to say thank you. I'll give you a few last words here if you want to close this podcast out.
Thank you so much for this time. I really enjoyed these topics. And as you were saying, like we have to be more passionate about what we love and find the ways to nurture or feed that passion, because there's no like a written path, and you have to build your own path in the fields that you are interested in. And I found this passion on cities because it connects so many other disciplines. And if I can do something good for my city, for my community, for myself too, because you were saying also about the Stoic, I love their approach of focusing on what you can control and not focusing so much on what you cannot control. The same happens in cities. Sometimes I want to like design better everything, but maybe it's not my time. I also have to be really wise in terms of when to focus my energy and in which projects I'm welcome to. I'm open to collaborate. I love working with people. I think that's the most beautiful thing about cities, as you were saying, like this energy, this talent that is being attracted by cities. So I'm glad that I'm here in Guatemala City, and as you said, I hope in 10 years or more we can find a much better city to live in, and we can invest in projects that make sense in this city, other cities, and create better, more healthy, prosperous, and happy cities.
Great. Well, Julian, thank you again for being on the Agents of Innovation podcast and for being an agent of innovation yourself. And I just want to say to those in the audience, if you haven't been to Guatemala yet, you should come with Fearless Journeys, first of all. But you should come, and we'll help you get here. Maybe you'll meet Julian when you're here. And there's a lot of great people here in Guatemala City really doing some very creative, innovative things. I think Julian's, one of the top people doing that. I've gotten to know him in the last few years, so it's really been incredible. And this podcast has been a long time coming, but really it was very recently that I really saw the impact that your work is really starting to have. And I said, man, we got to do a podcast before this guy changes Guatemala, because I got to get in on the early end here, to tell his story. But but thank you again, Julian, for being an agent of innovation and for being on the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Thank you, Francisco, and all the best for all the people that are watching us.
Thank you.